Sinisterhood. Well, this has inspired a thread in our Patreon Facebook group discussing how people don't really want to go on cruises anymore after learning some fun facts about the cruise lines that we exposed in the last episode.
Tommy, too. Because, of course, Tommy listens when he edits. And he said, man, I had very little desire to go already. And now, not a chance in hell. Like, yeah, it's fucking loose out there. Nobody wants to claim any type of crime because it's open water. Nobody wants it in their jurisdiction to have to deal with it. And so many things that happen out there just fall through the cracks. And this seems to be one of them, this tragic case.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I mean, there are people that are cruise are like, it's kind of like Disney people that are like, we go every year. We're like cruisers. I joined a cruise fans like Facebook page just because I was like, what is this really? And it is. People will be like, well, we've cruised this ship so many times and this other one so many times, and we're really loyal to this one because we like this bar and our family always does this thing. It becomes kind of like this, familial tradition or something like that, which is fine. I just am glad to see that several members of Congress have said, that's great. Everybody should be able to enjoy something, but it should be regulated. And you as a consumer deserve to have information about what you're going on, which, as we will talk about in So What Do We Think, even in a benign instance, does not get reported and does not get held to the standards that even the laws have said that they should be held to. So it's an industry that's, I didn't realize was so new, from the 60s, like we said in the last episode. And it, much like the airline industry, which we see still isn't perfect, fucking doors just shooting off in the middle of the sky.
Dude, the coincidences that had to occur for no one to have been injured in that. The people that were supposed to be sitting there missed the flight.
Yes.
It's man, but still, even though they hadn't fully ascended, you're still thousands of feet up in the air, and you have to now maintain your composure to land. Even if you're sitting in the row behind where the panel blew off, you're looking out at just the fucking open air, much like the open ocean. Like, if you fall out, sayonara. I mean, you're donezo.
It's like riding in a Jeep, but 10,000 feet in the air, 20,000 feet, however high up they were. And the guy, I think it was a younger guy, a row behind or a row front, his shirt got sucked off, the headrest got sucked off, stuff
off
like that.
His body?
Yeah, and it's this Boeing 737 MAX. It's the one that Southwest had issues with, and so they grounded them all. But you see kind of what happens when we loosen regulations, and thank God those people missed their flight. And I'm, maybe I come from my prior career as an investment advisor, which was a heavily regulated industry, only in the wake of Bernie Madoff, where oftentimes you see laws don't get passed. I remember starting in the investment industry in 2011, which was, 2008, kind of Bernie Madoff was in there, and learning all the regulations. And I'm like, you didn't have any of this before I got here? And they're like, nah, you can do whatever you wanted. It was great.
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of with any major, extremely profitable industry, airlines, cruise ships, stock market, securities, where until something horrible happens, and in this, the cruise line industry, in the case of that was the International Cruise Victims Association, so many repeated horrible incidences happen that you have a push where we got to get this shit under control.
We've been having a lot of stranger danger conversations with Ella lately. And one of those conversations involved the case of Adam Walsh. And before everyone thinks I'm a monster bringing up this case to my 6-year-old, I want to point out he was 6 when he was taken. And we did not go into details. It kind of organically came up because they're bringing back America's Most Wanted.
Yes,
which
that's right.
Amy's case was featured, or was it?
Yeah,
Amy's case was featured on, and hundreds of tips came in after that. I mean, it's a show that really does a lot of good, but that's why he started it, was because his son was kidnapped and killed. And we were watching something and the commercial for that came on, and it kind of organically came up. And without going into a ton of detail, we just explained he was in a department store. His mom had gone shopping. And Tommy said, back then it wasn't unusual for parents to leave their kids in, the toy section. He was like, I would be in the book section and just read books while my mom went shopping. Like, and same with Amber Hagerman. Like, sometimes these horrible, heinous things have to happen for everyone to realize, oh, we should have had a law that prevented that. Right. And much like this, like until something, enough of it happens to enough people, nothing really gets changed. And unfortunately, some people are, the reasons for that change. And then hopefully later everyone else can benefit from it. But this is one of those cases where things just weren't the same on a cruise ship in 98 as they are now. I've read that the railings were lower back then.
Yes.
They did not have cameras all over the ship like they do now. I mean, it was just a much
man overboard detection.
It was just a much looser environment. And it's one of those things, much like planes, where we all get on them and we just assume, which is not wrong of us to do, that everybody's done their due diligence that works in that industry to keep all of us safe that are passengers. But we have to remember, like, we're all still people. We're all just humans, and no one's, like a god that is going to prevent something from happening. So take everything with, some precaution. Just because you're like, well, Royal Caribbean's been around for decades. Surely they're a reputable cruise line. Maybe they are. I'm not trying to get sued by Royal Caribbean. But, I watched an interview where Amy Bradley described it as a floating city because there were 2,000 people on that ship. And when you think of, there are towns in Texas that don't have 2,000 people in them.
The new ships, they have divided into neighborhoods because they are so enormous that you will get almost like disoriented where you're at. Yeah, the icon of the seas, stuff like this. They are building them bigger, taller, more amenities, giant. And what you realize with any industry, and it's when you have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders to make money, you do the bare minimum that you have to do with regards to safety, reputation, whatever, and also risk mitigation. So I don't think you can get sued by Royal Caribbean or Carnival or Norwegian or whatever, because it is well documented, the incidents that they've had, incidents where they have instructed employees to lie on the stand to cover up things, whether it is incidents with passengers or because they're dumping oil in the middle of the ocean or whatever, and they're lying to the federal government when they're getting busted for that. So it's just, they're not particularly evil. It's just sort of any giant corporation that seeks to make money is looking out. Surly only looks out for Surly. Like Royal Caribbean's looking out for Royal Caribbean. So it's not
Boeing looks out for villain. Boeing. American Airlines looks out for American. It's
how
like
can we do this
HR
as cheap as possible?
Yeah. Like they're not working for you. And that's the thing with these cruise ships is if shit goes down on them and you go to the people on the cruise ship to try and help you, well, their number one priority is to protect their own ass and then help you. But if protecting their own ass means covering some stuff up, maybe not doing the search as well as they could have, whatever it might be, your interest really isn't their first priority. So you're fighting this battle like all by yourself on this floating city and then in foreign countries.
Yeah. And like you said, it's a floating city. And Christopher Guerin wrote a book called Devils on the Deep Blue Sea. And it was kind of this history of the cruise lines. And he said, the thing you have in every small town in the whole country, which you will never see on a cruise ship, is police, which is an impartial third party whose job should be, to investigate crimes with no financial conflict of interest. But in this case, they work for the company. Yeah. So we'll all bear that in mind as we hear how it was investigated.
I wonder if they have undercover cops on the ship and
no,
you
have to.
Know.
Well, I mean, no, there's a whole deal with the state of California for a while in the early 2000s said if you leave from our ports in California, you have to let like a sea marshal, which would be like an air marshal on board. But then what happens is this issue of kind of jurisdiction, and also the cruise ships just go, oh, okay, we won't leave from those ports anymore because like they don't want that. And not to say that they're absolutely covering something up, but when the heads of security have later gone on to testify on victims' behalf and said, listen, anytime this happened, my job was to offer them an upgrade, offer them entertainment, offer them excursions, shut them up and make them happy so that they don't call the FBI and they don't sue us. You kind of go, of course they don't want a cop on board.
Like when your mother-in-law got a free lifetime pass for cruises, and now they won't even honor it.
No,
but
and she was on the poop cruise from
It's
hell.
like, look over here, look at this flashy thing I'm shining at you. So, you appease people. It's a Band-Aid, and then turns out that Band-Aid is worthless.
It's worthless. But you know what? If you were on that Alaska Airlines flight where your door sucked off, they gave $1,500 vouchers to everybody. So,
well, if my shirt gets sucked off my body and out a plane while I am on it, I don't think $1,500 is going to cover the amount of therapy I need to recover from that.
Not at all. And, like we said with regulations, they go, oh, well, the cockpit black box recorder, it got recorded over. Well, why? Well, because you guys said we only had to keep it for 2 hours. Well, it's like, well, now we have to change the regulation and say, if there's an incident, you actually have to keep it for 24 hours. But you just see every single time, it's always, well, they said we only had to keep it for 2 hours, so delete it.
It really does make you realize everybody's just figuring shit out as they go. Like
nobody knows what's going
every
on.
industry. What'd you say?
It's all fake. No one knows anything.
And everything's just trial and error. I mean, I think we give so much credence to big corporations like airlines, cruise ships, hospitals, whatever, because they are these huge corporations. But at the end of the day, I mean, they're all run by people that don't know what the fuck they're doing half the time.
No. It's fallible humans making decisions in every single case.
Yeah. Well, I'm Christy.
I'm Heather.
And let's get into it. Less than a month after Amy Bradley went missing from the Rhapsody of the Seas cruise ship, hours before it docked at the Dutch island Curacao, her father Ron and her brother Brad returned to Curacao to pass out flyers with Amy's picture and information. While there, a local taxi driver approached Ron and Brad, telling them that he saw Amy on the day she disappeared. The driver claimed that shortly after the ship docked in Curacao, a woman matching Amy's description ran up to his window and asked where the telephone was. Amy's green eyes stood out to the driver, who pointed her in the direction of a phone. Ron told interviewers for the Max series Disappeared that the driver told him,
I want you to know that your daughter did not fall from that ship. She's here on the island, and I hope you can find her.
The driver then suggested 3 locations on the island where the men should search, one of them being a resort on the south coast of the island. Sadly, the resort, as well as the other 2 suggestions, only led to dead ends for Ron and Brad.
Which you can't blame them because you're back in Virginia, sort of sick to your stomach with worry and just like, fuck it, I'm going back. I'm going back to the island. I'm just going to beat the bush,
I mean, Beth
pound the
Holloway
pavement.
moved to Aruba when Natalie went missing, which is what I would do too. I mean, and unfortunately, because of like laws and green cards and whatnot, like you have to fly back every now and then to like reset everything. But to be dealing with the worst thing any parent could deal with, or brother, from a different country, I mean, you already feel helpless, and now you're like, I'm not even anywhere near this. You got to go back to the scene to see what you can find. And just a little aside, and we're going to hear from a lot of eyewitnesses that say stuff. And I would like to say, if you see a woman or anyone in distress that runs up to your taxi and is banging on the window and wide-eyed, seems scared, asking for a phone, intervene right then. Don't
Maybe let her have a free ride.
Yeah.
Let her in the taxi.
Are you okay? Do you need help? I mean, with any of these that we're going to discuss, like everyone months or years later came forward. That does no one any good. If somebody is in distress and it's worthy enough for you later to remember about it and mention, then it was worthy enough when it was going on for you to say, like, is everything okay? Do you need help? I mean, don't just be like, oh, well, she looked like she's terrified of something, but the phone's over there, and drive off. Like, that's not at all helpful.
No, I mean, there's some instances, especially in this case where apparently it's not like she was being pursued by someone with a gun or a knife. It would have been simple to intervene other than like, wow, I don't want to hassle with it. It's like, it could be the difference between life and death, seriously. So some cases, Jack Donaghy, be a patriot, Lemon, call it in. Sometimes you got to just involve authorities somehow.
I think it's always better to be safe than sorry. And that's, I mean, I've called 911 so many times in my life because of that I'm like, well, it could be nothing, but it could be something. And I'd rather have said something if it is something than to be like, oh, yikes. Yeah, I saw that girl like 4 months ago and she did look panicked, but I didn't really do anything at the time.
Yeah, make sure they get to. It's funny because we just at Simon's birthday, we're talking to our friend Kyle, who helped us initially put the panels in the studio. And when he was doing that many years ago, my doorbell rang and there was a girl on the porch who looked kind of nervous and younger and like she had house shoes on. And, you know, we didn't just go, sorry, get out of here. You know, Kyle walked out on the porch with me. We talked to her. We said, okay, here, the fire station's literally like right there. We watched her walk to the fire station. You know, you can do things that we didn't have to call the police on her or on us. You know, we just made sure she got to a safe location. And hopefully, you know, I thought, boy, I hope the people, whoever she was running from, don't come back to my house, but fuck them, come back to my house because she deserves somebody to look out for her. She, for whatever reason, chose to knock on our door and we just happened to be home at that time and stuff like that.
I had completely forgotten about that until you brought that up the other day. But yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, I believe it was cold out too because we were like, I think you gave her some shoes even.
Yeah, I did. I gave her a pair of my, like, I was like, oh, don't wear these. You can have these.
Yeah.
Because she had on, like, either she had socks on or was maybe barefoot, but actually it was like, I was like, you know, I've had these, like Tom's, like, slip-on shoes or whatever. I'm like, you can have them. She's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, just be safe wherever you're going instead of going, that's not really my business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in these cases a lot, people don't want to get involved at the time. But later, when a big news story is going on, people like to involve themselves for whatever reason that might be.
I will also say I do have a lot of privilege because I am a lawyer, so I do have a knowledge of the system and sort of this kind of like, come at me, bro attitude, and not everybody has that. So to be fair, you help when you can, where you can, to the extent that you can, for sure.
Also during this visit, while standing in an intersection, Brad believes he heard a voice that sounded like Amy's yell,
"Brad!"
from a passing vehicle. Believing it had come from a van, he and Ron chased after the van. When they caught up to it, however, it was only a single man in the car by himself. The men also encountered a few other witnesses who reported seeing Amy at Mondo Beach. Brad and Ron followed up at the beach, where both a lifeguard and a bathroom attendant recognized Amy from a photo. They each confirmed she had been at the beach alone within recent weeks, but had no further information to share.
In instances like this, you can't blame the family for running down leads, contacting America's Most Wanted. I think sometimes, again, on the internet, people go, well, obviously she fell overboard. Who cares? But that's ridiculous because if you have someone face to face going, no, I saw her within weeks, that's huge to that family.
And it's very hard to come to grips with the fact that maybe she did fall overboard and we're not going to see her again, but perhaps she is still alive and that gives us some hope. With not much to go on, Ron and Brad made the decision to leave the island and head back home. On their way to the airport, they received a panicked call from Iva back in Virginia. She had received a call that no parent wants. Investigators in Curacao had found a body washed ashore and believed it belonged to a female with brown hair. Tests were conducted while the Bradleys waited in excruciating emotional agony. When the island authorities called back weeks later, Ron and Iva were relieved that it was not Amy, as the body had been identified as a man from the pelvic girdle and part of the spine. Though they were left with hope, the Bradleys remained at square one. And this was also it was after Natalie Holloway had gone missing, but I remember this happening in the news and people thinking, oh, this might be from Natalie Holloway as well, like, bones washed ashore and whatnot. It wasn't, obviously, which again then makes me think, so it wasn't the two that we were looking for. It was just a man that had also gone missing or met some kind of untimely fate to the ocean.
This one was recent, and then there was, I think the jawbone was with Natalie Holloway, but you're right, there's these like instances where they have such an amount of missing persons or now finding this, it makes you wonder, who was that, you know, and how did they meet that fate?
And how many others are out there too.
Right.
Amy's case was featured on America's Most Wanted in April of 1998, and again in December of 1998. Chris Fenwick, the videographer who had provided a copy of the footage with Amy to Ron's boss, saw the episode air, though none of Fenwick's footage had been used. The Bradleys asked the FBI about the omission. Agents told the family that the tape had not been seen since the ship. Fenwick provided another copy to the Bradleys and also uploaded a copy online.
And this is another instance where Chris Fenwick's like, I handed it to Ron's boss. Ron's boss handed it to ship security, who said, the FBI will get this, and they never did.
Which,
so,
I mean,
why?
Last person that has it, it seems like it's your responsibility. If it didn't get to the FBI, what's the answer for that?
Yeah. Why? Was it an accident, or was it they don't really need this? And in which case, are you now impeding a federal investigation, whether purposefully and knowingly or just through your own disorganization and negligence, given they made those comments to their own videographer, scrub her from everything? It's not unreasonable to think perhaps it just sort of ended up in someone's
not
desk
at
drawer.
All the pictures of her were gone from, the gallery where you purchased them on the ship. And then she's just scrubbed. And that's such an insult to the Bradleys as well, because Royal Caribbean has essentially erased Amy from their vacation. It's like they erased her from ever having been there, which is not fair. This is her story. It's, you can't just paint the narrative that you want to paint and literally scrub people out of something because, we don't want that getting out because this looks really bad.
Yeah, it's going to bum everyone out if they find out a person's missing. Well, her family probably would still like to see some of those photos. And it's a strange thing to call Chris Fenwick too and say, I need those originals. Give me those originals. Yeah. Because if he didn't have those originals, he couldn't have made a copy in December of 98 and sent it to the FBI.
Mm-hmm. Canadian engineer and scuba diver David Carmichael saw Amy's case on the show and called the Bradleys with a tip. He had no interest in reward money, but told the family,
I've absolutely seen your daughter.
FBI agent Bradley Bryant told Disappeared it was the
most credible tip since Amy's been missing.
On the series Vanished, hosted by Beth Holloway, Natalie Holloway's mother, David explained that as he was on the beach getting his scuba equipment together about 5 months after Amy had gone missing, he saw a woman fitting her description walking with two men. The woman noticed that David spoke English and seemed to quicken her pace to speak to him. The two men stopped her and instead took her into a nearby bar. Feeling uneasy, David followed them inside. There, he noticed a scar on the woman's right shin and a Chinese symbol tattoo on her right ankle. He also saw a baby Tasmanian Devil Looney Tunes character spinning a basketball tattooed on her right shoulder. David told Vanished,
I was 2 feet away from her.
As for his confidence that it was Amy, David said,
it's not 99%. It's 100%. It was her.
Law enforcement searched the area after the tip, but there was no sign of her.
And it's, anytime tips like this come in where the person says, I don't want the $50,000 reward, because there's a $50,000 reward for information that might lead to her whereabouts, and then a different reward if she's actually found. And to say, please, I don't want any money. This is a thing that happened and you need to know about it. And the very specific Tasmanian spin in the basketball tattoo in that spot, you don't forget that. That's a strange thing.
This is, again, I have the question. If you felt so uneasy that you followed this woman and the two men she was with into a bar and sat close to her, why didn't you intervene and say something? Why didn't you walk up and say, hey, is everything okay here? Do you need any help? I mean, all of these people are like, yeah, it was really weird. It seemed really, like she was scared. And well, then say something. Again, it's not helpful to call the family months later. I mean, they go and search. It's a tip, sure, but that's just more money, resources, and empty hope that this family is then given, because at the time, nobody said anything. Nobody contacted the authorities when it would have actually mattered.
Some of the bad news that even if you were to call the tip in my the review of the 2022 Trafficking in Persons report for the Curacao itself, the government had almost no interest in stopping sex work. I mean, sex work was
legal
from
over there.
1949. They had a huge They had a huge brothel from 1949 to 2022 that operated. It was called Alegre Libre or something like that. I mean, it was like until the COVID pandemic essentially shut it down, it went on. So even if you call and they say she works with us, we're taking her around. I mean, maybe then at least you have information on it, but it may be that you go, they're not going to do anything around here.
Maybe. I just,
I don't know.
I mean,
it doesn't sit right.
It doesn't sit right. And also, I think hindsight is 2020. I mean, again, like eyewitness accounts just aren't very credible. Like, especially when you see something and then you read about a case and then you're like, oh, that was that person. So would you have made that connection had you not read about her case in something or seen it on the news? Who's to say? The tattoos, certainly that is something that sticks out. Again, I just think, did he remember them exactly how they were? I don't know. If it was her, I hate that another person didn't intervene when they could have and possibly helped her.
Right. You kind of see that over and over again here of like, like you said, that was kind of strange. And, that's the thing about America's Most Wanted is they want people like this to see it and it triggers a memory and it goes, oh my gosh, it was that person. But oftentimes it sounds like in this case, once they go back and search afterwards, it's too late. She's gone.
See something, say something.
Right.
In August of 1999, the Bradleys received an email from a man named Frank Jones, who claimed he was an ex-Special Forces agent with contacts in Curacao. Jones, a private investigator, claimed he could bring Amy home. The Bradleys were desperate for answers and agreed. Just days after first working together, Jones confirmed to them that Amy was alive on Curacao, being held in a compound by human traffickers, surrounded by armed guards and barbed wire. Jones told the Bradleys he needed $24,000 to begin his operation of extracting Amy from the compound. According to Jones, this money would be used to pay travel expenses and to hire a team of men to bring Amy back. On Ron and Iva's dime, Jones headed to Curacao to rescue their daughter. However, the expenses continued to add up, and Jones repeatedly asked the Bradleys for more money. Suspicious, they asked for some type of proof of their daughter's presence on the island. If I get an email from someone saying they can definitely help me and they seem credible, and then they come back with information again, it's like all you want is your daughter to be alive. So I fault the Bradleys zero in any of these things because they're grieving. They're just their whole world has been shattered. All you want is your daughter, your sister back. Unfortunately, for others, that's prime pickings for let's prey on the vulnerable.
Yeah, and you say, all they want is an answer. And if someone comes up and says, I'm so good at this, I'm Special Forces, I can hunt anybody down, I'll have an answer for you within a week. And then a week later they go, she's being held by Colombian drug traffickers and they also traffic in humans. And he had a woman named Judith Margarita who said that she, get her on the phone and tell Iva, I've seen her there. Yes, she's there. And he's like, see, I have a witness. I mean, it was for them to say, let us see a little bit of proof. They had a little bit here and there, but he was very convincing that this was it. This was the solution. She's there. She's alive. We got her. And it's only, a year and a half later. So you have hope like, oh, good. We can get her out before she's too horribly traumatized and damaged by all this.
It also tracks with what the Bradleys believe happened to her. So you're like, this is what we thought. So, it makes sense. Yeah. Jones sent back images of a blonde man on the beach alongside a woman in a hat and bathing suit. According to Iva, the woman had Amy's exact tattoos and
stood like Amy. She was built like Amy. And so we thought it was Amy.
Convinced by the photos, the Bradleys tried sourcing the $100,000 needed to pay Jones. A former employer was willing to front the couple, but only if Jones could be verified as legitimate. The employer sent a trusted associate, former Special Forces agent Tim Buchholz, to Curacao to check things out.
Let me just say, having seen interviews with Tim Buchholz, I would send him on my behalf to check things out too. That dude looks like he gets to the bottom of shit.
When you think Special Forces agent, Tim Buchholz is the picture in my head that comes to mind. Just like
mustache, goatee kind of thing.
Long hair, grizzled.
Long hair,
You're like, he has seen some shit big. You're like, he could just crush a man's skull with one hand.
Yeah, with his bicep in between. Probably rides a motorcycle, sleeveless shirt. Sure. Like, that's the type of guy that's like, I'll go find out what the real story is. And you're like, thank you, Tim.
In October of 2000, Ron and Iva were led to believe their nightmare would soon be ending. Jones told the Bradleys to wait in a hotel in Miami while he and his team extracted Amy from the compound. Ron and Iva waited by the phone for a week, but they never reunited with their daughter. Instead, they received a phone call from Jones with bad news. One of his men had been shot during the mission, and they had to abort.
And that's October 2000 after he initially contacted them in August 99. So that's over a year that he's been stringing them on.
Yeah, and getting money from them and just living it up on a beautiful tropical island.
Yeah, and while he made this phone call, drinking in a bar.
Yeah, and Tim Buchholz said he was there, and he overheard him. He's like, he's talking to this family and telling them these things that just aren't true. And thank goodness there are good people that they're like, this isn't right. I got to put an end to this.
Yeah, Buchholz was like, I'm calling it in.
Not on my dime. Very quickly, Tim Buchholz determined that Jones had been lying about everything, including the botched raid. Buchholz called the Bradleys and broke the news. It was all a scam. The photos of Amy that had been so convincing were staged, with a local tattoo shop stenciling on tattoos that matched Amy's, all in an effort to convince her desperate parents to send more money. In total, Frank extorted over $200,000 from Amy's family and donors for her search fund.
Going to a tattoo shop to have stenciled on a fake model. And we'll put the photos that he sent them in the notes. Before I realized that this was a scam, I was like, oh, holy shit, that's her. I mean, it looks like her, slender build, but the tattoo specifically in the exact spots in the photo, she just so happens to be kind of standing in a way. You know, she's got a hat on, so you really can't see her face very well.
And kind of a sarong thrown over the other shoulder.
Yeah, but you can see that tattoo on that shoulder. You see the tattoo on the ankle, and it was like, you did it to dupe them. I mean, it was very purposely done.
Yeah. There's a special place in hell for people that are willing to go to these links for money.
Yeah.
The Bradleys reported Jones to the FBI. When Jones returned to Virginia from Curacao, he was arrested at the airport. Jones pleaded guilty to wire fraud and mail fraud. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison in order to repay the extorted funds to the Bradleys. The money, however, was the last thing on the grieving family's mind. Waiting in that Miami hotel room, Ron and Iva had been so hopeful that they were about to be reunited with their daughter. To learn it had all been a scam was unfathomable. Through tears, Iva told Disappeared,
I'll never understand in a million years. He's a father. How in the world do you tell parents that you know where their child is and you're going to go get her and it all be a lie?
I think we all have that question, Iva. It is unfathomable to say the least. And what's the end game? I mean, I guess you say, well, we couldn't do it because, it was just too dangerous. And then you hope that you've just gotten away with $200,000 to target people that are at their most vulnerable and extort money from them like this. 5 years, not enough, in my opinion.
No, and I think that's why he took the plea. I believe the judge gave him the absolute maximum that he could give under these charges, under the circumstances, because it was so egregious. And it's not just, I'm going to go in and get a tip and take $50,000. You have opened a vein and you are draining this family as with hope. It's like pumping them full of hope, draining them of money, pumping them full of hope, draining them of money. And you can, if it weren't for Tim Buchholz, like how long would this have gone on of, okay, well, they took her off of Curacao. So like after that botched raid and my guy got shot, they actually took her to, where do I want to go next on vacation? The Bahamas. You know what? They took her to the Bahamas. So I'm going to need to stay there for 6 months. Eventually I'm sure the Bradleys would have gone, you know what? You're not giving us any answers. But he was extremely convincing and went to great lengths to make him seem like they should keep funding this, because when you want your kid back, you're like, no amount of money is too much.
Oh, absolutely. And I just said it wasn't just the obvious disappointment in the money, but it was also that he took time away from the investigation where they could have been looking in other avenues, and people that actually had tips, credible tips, could have been helping. So, if you've spent a year following down, just chasing down some scam artist leads. Yeah. When really you could have been using that time, and time is something you never get back. So to see Iva in that disappeared episode, I mean,
it's crushing. Yeah.
Oh my God. The raw grief that I think really is reserved for parents losing their children in situations like this, no matter how old the kid is. It's part of you is gone and part of you is missing, and all you want is to get it back, and you feel so helpless. And then some fucking snake like this comes along and not only gives you all this hope, but also drains you financially. I mean, it's just the rage that I would feel.
Right. Like you said, 5 years is not too much. Watch your back, Frank Jones. But for real, as parents, they lost her twice, because that feeling of waking up at 6 a.m. going, Amy's not here, and you're running. Well, August of 99, you get told she's alive. She's going through really bad stuff right now, which makes you sick and sad and hurt in a different way. But then to realize, like, all of that was all made up, by the way. You never had her back to even lose her again. But that perception, that feeling, that lie that them sitting in that hotel room in Miami, that was so real. She was alive for them then. And it's just sick, the depths that people will go to, truly.
It really truly is. A retired naval officer came forward in 2002 with a tip that once again reignited the family's belief that Amy had been kidnapped and forced into sex work. While stationed in Curacao in 1999, the officer said he had been a customer at a local brothel. A white woman with brown hair had approached the uniformed man, saying,
"My name is Amy Bradley, and I need help."
He asked what she needed, and she explained,
"I need help, and I can't get out."
Seconds later, the woman was beckoned from the sailor by someone else at the bar and walked away. Worried he may get in trouble for patronizing a brothel, the naval officer said nothing until years later when he was out of the service. By then, the brothel had burned down. Ron told Vanish,
"Seen that a lot of places on Curacao get burned down for whatever reason."
Well, if you need to destroy a lot of evidence, it's one good way to do it.
A very easy way to do it. And on the one hand, I get it. You're an officer. But on the other hand,
you're an officer. You took an oath to serve and protect. So if you want to go get your jollies in a brothel, okay. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you get to leave your fucking morals, credentials at the door. If somebody comes up to you and says they need help, whether you know the case or not, a woman has approached you in a brothel saying, I need help. I need to get out.
Yes.
Okay, then fucking help her.
Yes. And you may say, oh, well, I'm going to get discharged from the Navy. Okay, you're also a hero who saved someone's life. I think that will make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But, some folks have said, why did he wait so long? But I mean, it's just to save his own ass. And he apparently testified before the grand jury, I think in the Frank Jones case, because they were going through where is she really, basically proving that Frank Jones was a fraud. So to me, this is extremely credible that you have a lot to lose as a retired naval officer. You're going to say under oath in a federal courtroom, someone said, my name is Amy Bradley and I need help. That's pretty credible.
Maybe. I'll save it for So What Do We Think? I mean, I would like to think it's credible, but I also, what's outweighing the credibility of his comment is the fact that I think if this had really happened, he would have said something at the time. I just can't imagine that he would have waited. But also, I think it's possible that somebody did come up to him and say, my name is Amy Bradley and I need help. At this point, her story is well known, especially on Curacao.
Yeah, by 99, yeah.
People are going to know that live there, the case and everything. If you are a woman that does need help in a brothel and you see a uniformed officer, I would also approach him thinking he could help me and perhaps use information that I thought would help me get out.
That's true. It's just people save their own ass. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm not going to get in trouble. I don't want to get involved. And so he's going to save his own ass and just not say anything until it was safe. And until the FBI goes, you came forward with a tip. You're going to need to swear under oath that what you heard and what you saw.
In 2005, a photo surfaced online of a sex worker on a Caribbean escort website. The woman's name was supposedly Jazz, but Amy's family believed the woman in the photos was Amy. All photos of the woman were angled in a way that Amy's tattoos would not show. Jazz had longer hair than Amy and appeared much more made up and older than Amy, but the woman's facial features appeared to the Bradleys as a match for Amy. The family sent the photo to a local forensic detective who now works for the FBI. The detective compared her facial structure, hairline, and ear shape. His conclusion was that the photo was an exact match to Amy. The expert even told the Bradleys,
I would bet my career that this is Amy. And that's what I've called it, a harsh and tormented Amy. And definitely the hair is much longer. She looks older, makeup on. And it was like an all-inclusive erotic vacations for like $2,700. And it's sad to see that. I mean, it is a place where it's legal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is positive for those that partake in it.
Women are doing that or wanting to do it of their own free will. And even maybe some that are, like, what are their circumstances that that's what they have to do to support themselves? I do think that, the pictures have a lot of similarities. It does obviously look like she's either wearing a wig or her hair's grown out and they've done it up or whatever. To just receive an email like this out of the blue, and again, like, just stomach drop, because you're glad. You're like, oh, okay, so I think she's alive. This looks like her. But then at the same time, imagine what she's going through if this is her.
Yeah. Yes, because she's not smiling, happy in the photos. It's sort of a sad, kind of vacant look on her face. And the forensic detective, took the different parts and mapped like where it would match. And your ears are, close to fingerprints, and said, look, this shape of this ear matches the shape of this ear here. So he would bet his career on it. It's just, makes you sick to your stomach to think. It's like, on the one hand, you want it to be her because it means that she's alive. But on the other, if it is her, oh my God.
Yeah. The abuse.
In 2005, what has she been subjected to for 7 solid years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sinisterhood will be right back.
Well, I've had generalized anxiety disorder and depression since I was in high school. I, at the time, didn't have that diagnosis, but I now do. And it's been a struggle, the majority of my life. And only one I've really been able to manage with medicine and therapy, and also now with MindBloom.
MindBloom is the leader in ketamine therapy, having helped tens of thousands of people overcome their anxiety and depression. MindBloom's expert clinicians and guides can help you feel better in days, not weeks, and you can complete treatment entirely from the comfort of your home.
In a study of over 1,000 MindBloom clients, 89% reported improvements in their anxiety and depression after only 4 sessions. Now MindBloom has new programs that go beyond depression and anxiety to help you overcome challenges in everyday life.
Right now, MindBloom is offering our listeners $100 off your first 6-session program when you sign up at mindbloom.com/Sinisterhood and use promo code Sinisterhood.
Break free from your anxiety and depression and feel better, faster with MindBloom. Mindbloom.com/Sinisterhood and use promo code Sinisterhood. A woman named Judy Maurer was vacationing in Barbados in 2005 when she had a suspicious run-in with a woman who looked like Jazz. In a mall bathroom, 2 men entered with a woman in her early 30s. Judy was in the stall and hid her feet so as not to be noticed. One of the men said to the woman,
"The deal is at 11 o'clock and you better be ready to go. I'm warning you, this is my deal and you better not mess it up."
The men left the restroom and Judy emerged from the stall to approach the woman. Judy asked,
"Where are you from?"
In a soft voice, the woman replied,
"Virginia."
When Judy asked her name, the woman said,
"Amy."
Prompting Judy to respond excitedly,
"My daughter's name is Amy."
Judy's volume seemed to alarm the woman, who looked toward the door with a frightened expression. The men began pounding on the door until it opened. Then they left with the woman. Fucking Judy. What is your problem? You know that this is like a not a good situation, and your reaction is, well, that's my daughter's name. What a coincidence.
Like, shut it.
That's not the move, Judy.
No, the next move is, what can I do for you? Where are you going? How can I help you?
Yeah.
But gosh, it is, from her perspective, she's outnumbered. If there's two guys dragging this girl around, what'd she be like? I'll fight you two gentlemen. They're going to punch Judy in the face and leave her in a stall. So, when you hear men enter the women's room, you're putting your feet up. I would have done the same thing. Like, holy shit. But you're right. When the person is expressing to you, we all can learn lessons from the interactions that all of these people had with whomever they had the interactions with. And that is to maybe let them take the lead a little bit and say, like, what can I do to help you? What can I do? Where are they going to take you? What's happening at 11 o'clock? Because I believe her and her husband just left the mall after that.
Yeah. So what,
again,
how is this helpful? How is this helpful, Judy, to say all of this months after, like, this alleged sighting happened? Like, it's just, again, I feel like these things give the family so much hope, like little breadcrumbs being trailed along, but they inevitably lead nowhere because they're reported entirely too late.
Yeah.
A few months later, the photos of Jazz from the escort website had been made public. Judy saw them and instantly recognized the young lady from the bathroom in Barbados. She told Beth Holloway on Vanished.
I'm looking at this picture and I'm going, oh my God, that girl looks so familiar. I think that's the girl I saw in Barbados. And when I read it, I realized her name was Amy.
Judy contacted the Bradleys, who passed along the tip to the FBI. Judy was able to work with sketch artists to create a composite of Amy and her abductors, which led to nowhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, it looks like Jazz. The sketch sort of looks like Jazz, and then the abductors just sort of look like average bad guys you would see, almost bad guys you'd see in a movie kind of thing. Kind of gruff, bodyguard-looking, meaty dudes. So it did not help bring anybody in.
On March 24th, 1999, exactly 1 year to the day that Amy went missing, her parents filed 2 civil lawsuits in Miami, Florida, against Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, seeking unspecified damages. The first suit alleged negligence in the company's failure to search for Amy on board the ship. Her family alleged that this failure led to Amy being
abducted, hidden, and forcibly removed from the ship.
On March 28th, once Rhapsody of the Seas docked in Puerto Rico, the Bradleys alleged that their daughter was
shoved into a waiting taxi at the terminal.
The second lawsuit was for Amy's wrongful death. They also alleged intentional infliction of emotional distress by Royal Caribbean and claimed that the cruise line had defamed both Ron and Brad. So this is a little bizarre that they filed both of these lawsuits that seem to kind of contradict one. On one hand, they're saying, she wrongful death, but on the other that she is still kind of alive somewhere and was kidnapped and has been forced into a trafficking situation. What do you make of that?
The only thing I can think of is that this was a big issue at the congressional hearings before they passed that 2010 law, that when you buy, at least back then and still to this day, it's a contract of adhesion when you buy a cruise ticket. So you get a cruise ticket and then it says, here's all the ways you can sue us, which is very, very limited. This is how long you have to sue us, which is very limited. This is where you can sue us, which is federal court in Miami, most of the time, very limited. And you are agreeing that although under statute, that you have 2 years to bring this case, you're agreeing that by buying this cruise ticket, you only have a year. You actually only have 1 year to bring this. And my only thought was that it's exactly a year to the day that Amy went missing. They were running out of time, and they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and going, well, we'll go ahead and file this one, and if this goes through, we'll go ahead and file this one if this goes through. I don't know that it could prove her death. That there's no body. That's really hard. I think pretty much either way, they were between a rock and a hard place. Because if you say your negligence led her to being trafficked, prove it. Well, your negligence led her to dying. Prove it. We can't prove either of them. There's a little bit of evidence for the trafficking. There's a little bit of evidence for the death, but there's not what is a preponderance, whatever the standard of proof that they would have in these cases for either. So it may have been, the only thing I could surmise would be a litigation tactic of, we're fixing to run out of time, so we better just go ahead and file them both.
Shoot your shot. Let's hope like you said, just throw in whatever you can to see if something sticks.
Before your time runs out, the time that you agreed to, but you probably didn't know you agreed to it. And that's what the senators and stuff at these hearings would go, excuse me, sir, you're from the cruise line, whatever association. He's like, this is a 0.4 font. Do you expect anybody to be able to read this? And the guy's like, well, we have to be able to print it. And the senator was like, yeah, you're full of shit. I mean, he didn't say that, but he was like, come on. Like, this is the tiniest font. So to assume, oh, well, the consumer had they had a reasonable time to know that they weren't allowed to sue us beyond the, 1 year, which is a shortened statute of limitation that they agreed to. It's like, dude, you buy your cruise ticket online. You're not like, and let me explore my rights before I do that and agree to go on. They're like, no, you're just like, sweet, I want to go to Puerto Rico.
How many times have I just hit blindly, like, accept, like, confirm, I agree to these terms and conditions. I did it last night, like, without having read all of it. So, I mean, that's pretty common practice, especially if it's in the tiniest font that you got to get a magnifying glass out to read it. Like, I think it's ridiculous that they would think that, like, oh, well, we've covered all of our bases and given the consumer all the information they need to be well informed of their rights. Like, maybe, but, like, realistically, come on.
No, and we always say in America of like, we are land of everybody having rights. And it's like, not really. Because if someone has more money than you, which would be a cruise ship, more power than you, this cruise line, they can essentially force you to give your right up because you have to trade it in exchange for the ability to go on the ship, which means you've now traded what you can recover for, damages you can recover for, how long you can sue for, and things like that. It's like when you go to a baseball game, when I worked at the speedboat company, going on a speedboat, things like that where you go, well, if we didn't have it, everybody would sue all the time and yada, yada. So if you ever want to get real pissed off, dive into like mandatory arbitration agreements, like almost all of us in the United States and all of our interactions with large companies, like AT&T, your phone service, your internet service, you've agreed to like massive arbitration. Like you basically can't sue them. It becomes, to me, we have been forced to forfeit what should be our right to confront an entity, a person, whatever, in a courthouse because they have more money than us and more bargaining power from us. So you hate to see that. And you hate to see that our representatives have gone, well, yeah, I think it's great for the phone companies and the cruise companies and everybody to do this. It's like, I bet you do because they got you elected. Yeah. They are the ones that got you elected with all that money.
They also have you over a barrel because you're like, well, I mean, I need phone service. I want to go on this vacation. So it's like, I mean, I guess I'll just agree to this. And I mean, 9 times out of 10, nothing happens. But if something does happen, then you're fucked.
Yeah, when you sort of get into plaintiffs' work on behalf of victims trying to sue large companies, it becomes like a basket of tangled yarn of like just all the things wrong. And just like America, the justice system, politics, once you start pulling one, you're like, oh, it's a huge knot under there. So contracts of adhesions are one of those, and where you say, well, you agreed when you bought the ticket, you only had a year. And so they were probably like, all right, well, we'll file what we can file on this 1 year.
Yeah. During the litigation, the Bradleys were asked to disclose any and all reports they had gotten about Amy's whereabouts. They were asked to provide this in written questions as well as during a deposition. In both instances, they were under oath. Rather than reveal every tip they had received, the family initially revealed only 3 witnesses, including David Carmichael, the Canadian scuba diver. All 3 witnesses disclosed by the Bradleys had similar stories, that Amy was seen accompanied by 2 men and seemed to be under duress.
This is a really nitty lawyer lesson on behalf of the defendant counsel, which is representatives from Royal Caribbean. They asked a super broad interrogatory, which is what you ask written questions in early 8 days of discovery. And it was a very broad thing. And you swear at the bottom, I have fully answered that. And their answer to that interrogatory was like, here's 3 names or 5 names or whatever. We swear that's the only people we've heard from. But it wasn't.
Yeah.
And it's like, technically, you would have to go see attachment and go, here's 150 tips we got from America's Most Wanted. Here's a bunch of cuckoo people on, they didn't have Facebook back then, but, on message boards. This is weird letters and postcards we received. I mean, when they word it that way, unless you go, hey, listen, we got 10,000 tips. We really can't disclose them all. Can you narrow this? But it wasn't the case. Like, they had their arms around what tips they had. And because their lawsuit was, we're alleging that Amy was whisked away in this terminal, they provided only the witnesses that were helpful to that.
Yeah. Royal Caribbean filed a motion to dismiss, complaining that the Bradleys were committing a fraud on the court. The company alleged that the Bradleys purposefully withheld information from over 105 other witnesses who had come forward with information that Amy was alive and was not under duress. The court focused on 5 key witnesses who Brad and Ron had spoken with during their April 1998 trip to Curacao. In addition to the taxi driver who told them Amy walked along the pier and asked for the location of a payphone, the father and son had gotten statements from 2 additional men. One was named Lindo and the other was named either Andy or Peter, both of whom claimed to have seen Amy alone, apparently on her own free will, at the island's Mambo Beach. Ron and Brad followed up on the leads by visiting the beach. There they met 2 additional witnesses, a lifeguard and a bathroom attendant, both of whom recognized Amy from the picture as having been alone at the beach previously. Well, I mean, I get it. I get it as a parent that you're just trying to get your kid back. You want the strongest case possible. Unfortunately, if you don't follow the rules, that gives the other side a real big window to get it thrown out.
Yeah, and that's the issue would be, I mean, just say, hey, yeah, we don't know the credibility of any of these tips,
Yeah.
Somebody could have said they seen her
they're all
in Italy.
eyewitness accounts. They're all hearsay. Yeah. Nothing can be corroborated.
No, and even so, I mean, could you even, or what are you going to subpoena this taxi driver? I mean, maybe if you're Royal Caribbean and go, hey, we'll pay you, we'll get you a ticket to Miami to come to this deposition. I don't know. But that's the issue is just like they thought, okay, well, this is a public filing. This is what they said, it's a public filing. It's for safety. We don't want to get too much misinformation out there because this was a case that was on America's Most Wanted. It was on the cover of People magazine. So the filing of this lawsuit was news. So therefore, answers to the deposition interrogatories was going to be news. And I understand if you're thinking, we really got to control this public narrative of she has been trafficked. We need people to give us these trafficking tips. You wouldn't want to be like, yeah, she was partying in Barbados and she was fine. She didn't look like she was under distress at all. You might not want to include that. Or like you even said, it's all just, we don't know. People saw a thing on America's Most Wanted and called us and was like, it was her, but we don't know if it was or not.
Yeah. Royal Caribbean also pointed to the over 100 written tips the family poured over in the weeks following the America's Most Wanted airings. Over 25 of these reports mentioned Amy's baby Taz tattoo, but none of the reports mentioned that she was under duress. Because the Bradleys only revealed witnesses who corroborated their version of events, that Amy was kidnapped under duress, and purposely concealed contradictory reports, the court found the family had perpetuated a fraud on the court and dismissed their case with prejudice.
Which that is a severe punishment to be dismissed with prejudice that you cannot refile. And again, you've agreed by your contract of adhesion to a shortened statute of limitations. So now the door is also closed to ever sue them again because the time is lapsed.
That's really tough. I get that you're like, this is our one shot. We got to make it as convincing as possible. At the same time, though, if you're not completely transparent, the other side is going to find it. That's their only job. So it's going to come out and then you're going to be set back even further than you were before this.
Yeah, it's a multi hundreds of $1 million company. They've got plenty of resources to have a little associate that's going to go through every single tip that the FBI got, that America's Most Wanted got, and essentially like make a little chart and go, we said any and all. You said, I swear I've given you any and all. We can literally prove that you didn't. And I don't think that they did it with any kind of malice or shady or whatever. I think, again, they thought they were doing the right thing. But if it says any and all in an interrogatory, that's what they mean.
Yeah. After the court's decision, Royal Caribbean's attorney, Jeffrey Maltzman, told the Miami Herald,
There were at least 5 witnesses that the Bradleys concealed, all of whom reported they had seen Amy in Curacao under no duress shortly after she disappeared. Some identified her by a tattoo of the Tasmanian devil on her shoulder, and others by photographs.
The Bradleys claimed they withheld the information to protect Amy's safety. Maltzman told reporters that while the company sympathized with the family's tragedy,
"We're delighted with the decision and pleased to see that the judge has upheld the long-established rule that lying under oath is never acceptable, no matter the purported reasons."
The family appealed the suit's dismissal, but lost that as well, closing the door on civil recovery against Royal Caribbean. I don't love Jeffrey Maltzman's statement of "we're delighted." I mean, at the end of the day, a young woman's gone missing and her family is grieving. So, yes, you may have won this case, but maybe be a little more tactful and compassionate when speaking to reporters.
Yeah, it was like, we are very sad for the family's loss, but whoa, yeah. We did it. It's like, we don't need to rub it in. And it's like lying under oath. It's like, you could have reframed that and said, like, omitting things even for emotional reasons. Softened it's like, have a fucking heart. They don't. No, he's a huge defense attorney. He's probably not.
For a huge cruise line. Yes. His pockets are lined.
Oh, most definitely. But that's his job, is to say, to disprove, both of the lawsuits. So I think because they had filed this wrongful death suit and this, we think you were negligent and therefore she got trafficked. Honestly, this may have been one of the best things for them, because in the responses, and the motion to dismiss and, all the public statements and whatnot, but what the Royal Caribbean said to the court was like, she's alive and she's fine, apparently, according to all these witnesses. So I think even if they could have tried to prove that, the wrongful death, get that dismissed because we have all these witnesses saying she's alive, and the trafficking, get that dismissed because we have all these witnesses saying, she was hanging out at the beach. She seemed all right to me. She didn't seem like she was being trafficked. So it could have really turned maybe the narrative away from, does anybody know anything? Because it's like, well, we already decided she probably just ran off. Royal Caribbean proved it in court. Yeah. Versus this, you're like, I got dismissed. We can't really say what happened.
Yeah, true. Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead on March 24th, 2010. However, the mystery of her fate remains unsolved. The Bradleys remain steadfast in their belief that Amy was kidnapped and forced into sex work. They believe Amy left their cabin in search of coffee and was abducted by a crew member shortly thereafter. Other theories have also emerged. The theory that Amy had intentionally jumped from the ship to end her life was presented early on in the investigation. Quickly, though, this theory fell apart, and to this day remains highly unlikely. Amy showed no signs of suicidal tendencies, and in fact, was very happy with her life. She was excited to start a new job upon returning home from the cruise, had sent pleasant postcards to friends during the vacation that mentioned when she would be back in Virginia, and had recently adopted a new puppy that she dearly loved.
Yeah, the FBI seems to just go, there's no way it was suicide. Because
No. Yeah. I mean, there was, and, sure, anything can happen, but like, why would she have chosen this place to carry something like that out? A family vacation where it just made no sense. She was she showed no signs of depression or suicidal tendencies. She had a lot of plans for the future and had made those known. They very quickly wanted to be like, well, she probably jumped, so they can just wipe their hands of it and be done with it, but not a chance.
Yeah, suicide is the best case scenario if you're Royal Caribbean, because it's not, our railings were too short. I mean, it's like she climbed over railings that were perfectly
safe. She wanted to
safe.
do it. Yeah, we couldn't have stopped it. Yeah.
When you see like the postcards that says like, okay, I'll be back on Saturday, like can't wait to see you. And they said she brought like so many rolls of film because her plan was to take certain pictures and make a collage for her new apartment. She like wanted to make a collage on her coffee table or something like that. So it's like it doesn't strike somebody that's suicidal when they're like in the middle of a craft project that, is dependent on this cruise.
Yeah. And had been partying and having a great time.
Yeah.
And While Amy most likely didn't jump off the ship of her own accord, one of the more popular theories is that she accidentally fell overboard. Ron awoke to see Amy on the cabin's balcony at 5:30 a.m., and the balcony door closed. 30 minutes later, Ron said he was awoken again by something, though he doesn't know what. At that time, he discovered his daughter was no longer on the balcony and that the door was slightly open. Web sleuths have posited that sometime between 5:30 and 6 a.m., Amy may have fallen overboard. The theories for why this may have occurred range from Amy leaning over the railing to vomit, possibly due to seasickness or a night of drinking, to Amy having gone back into the cabin sometime after 5:30 to retrieve her cigarettes before going back onto the balcony to smoke. Some believe that at this time, Amy fell overboard with her cigarettes and lighter in hand. Proponents of this theory argue it is the most likely, given the timeline. Others dispel this theory, attributing Amy's strong swimming skills and lack of a body as the main reasons. Well, Occam's razor would say that she fell overboard.
Well, especially given there was almost no man overboard technology then, and there's almost none now. I mean, it's now there's cameras at least, and some ships have infrared cameras. Yeah, there's now the regulations state that to the extent the technology is available, cruise ships must implement the most cutting edge man overboard technology, which cruise lines have argued is literally just cameras and that are not monitored by people 24/7. They're just cameras that are recording. So then if, in this case, they didn't have them. But now if this were to happen, they'd go, hey, we think she went missing at 5:30 and 6. There would be footage. And they would rewind it and go, okay, yeah. And in some cases, they might even have heat sensor cameras if it's too dark or whatever and go, okay, yeah, we see something warm about this shape of a human, fall into the water and we missed it or whatever, which in that case, at least you would kind of know where to go back and search.
It would be way too late.
People, 4% of them, if you fall over a cruise ship, you have a 4%
Those aren't
chance.
odds that I want to take.
I would never take it.
The man overboard stuff, unless can help you right then. I mean, it's basically just like, oh, well, we can go back and give you some closure as to what happened, but they weren't going to be saved unless, somebody was out there and saw it happen. And even then, it can be difficult.
And that's what there are new companies that developed technology where basically it would almost be like a sensor that if something fell over, it would immediately alert everyone, like somebody just went over, literally stop the ship immediately, turn around, go get them, whatever. But cruise lines have said it's about $500,000 to put that on every ship. And the cruise lines argue the technology is not sufficiently tested and advanced it's not sufficiently tested to actually work. So they're like, we shouldn't have to undertake basically outfitting our ships with all this stuff with something that may or may not work. So they continue to tell the Coast Guard, the only thing we can do is have these cameras. Sorry, that's what we have. So all that to say is you are welcome to go on a cruise. Please be aware they do not know if you fell over, aside from someone noticing in your life and then going back and looking at the videos later. I was under the impression back in recently, Disney, you got the little bracelets. They know where you are. They'll track you here and there. Surely if you fell over, it would track. No, they don't know. No. Somebody has to see it happen.
You had a chip implanted on you. I don't know how they would.
I was thinking like a magic band or something. Like, what if you had that where it's like, okay, if any of these bands are X distance away from the ship while we're in motion, that's like, but you would have to stop the whole ship for somebody chucking one overboard. But I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But especially in 1998, they would have had no clue.
No. And people say, oh, well, somebody would have heard something. They would have heard a scream or
it's loud as fuck
would
on those
they?
Cruise ships.
I mean, you get knocked unconscious on the way down. Also, it's 5:30 in the morning. It's dark. It's on the side of the ship. What's the odds that somebody's going to be looking at that exact spot to see something like that happen?
No, that's a good point. And I've been watching a lot of the Royal Caribbean 9-month cruisers that are on there, on the cruise around the world or whatever. And just them in their rooms, it's loud. First of all, not every window opens. And, especially the people down lower or whatever. God, the ones that were going through the Drake's Passage and near Antarctica, it made me want to throw up. But because your
water
your
coming
windows,
over your window, thank you.
Huge waves, huge. You. I mean, there's some of them were 16 footers. It's crazy. But I mean, of course, the cruise ship's a lot taller than that. But anyhow, your windows don't open. Not all of them do. Even the ones that do you just you sleep with the window open? Even so, it's the sound of a huge ship. It's not like it's dead silent on the ocean.
No.
You've got the giant engines of the ship moving, the electricity, the hum, the buzz, everything. It would be, even if you did hear a scream, you might go, was that a seagull?
Yeah. Yeah. Or shit splashing around in the ocean all the time. There's waves and stuff.
You would not hear a splash. No, unless you were still, I don't think you'd hear a splash because
yeah.
Plus, you think about it, as a ship is going, if someone jumps off and the ship is going to continue going, that's any screams like that, you're not going to, it's going to be gone.
No.
They're going pretty heavy, it's pretty steady knots to try to get to port, right on time or whatever. And so they're not. It's not silent out there.
And I think there's a good chance when people fall overboard that they're unconscious before they even hit the water. They hit something on the way down that knocks them out. So, and even if you don't and you hit the water and she's a strong swimmer, I feel like that goes out the window given the circumstances. You could be
shocking
Michael Phelps. And if you fall off a cruise ship after a night of drinking and you're exhausted and potentially still drunk in the middle of the dark open ocean, your chances for survival are very low.
Yeah, the two recent stories I saw where people were rescued, it was like their friends watched them do it, or someone, witnesses were like, oh shit, that guy just fell. And it was in the daylight. Yeah. And so, you kind of go, you may be in shock, and if the ship stops and they're like, don't move, we're coming to get you, stuff like that. But yeah, the darkness, that is.
No, it's terrifying too.
It's terrifying.
Like the Bradleys, many believe Amy met her fate at the hands of one of the Rhapsody of the Seas crew, possibly a band member or a waiter. Eyewitness accounts place bass player Alistair Douglas and Amy together on the ship around 6 a.m. Douglas told authorities the last time he saw Amy that night was at 1 a.m. The results of his polygraph were inconclusive, and he has always maintained his innocence. Still, several eyewitnesses allegedly testified before a grand jury that they saw Amy and Alistair exiting the ship's glass elevator together around 6 a.m. One of these witnesses also claims to have seen Alistair give Amy a glass containing a dark liquid, possibly coffee or soda, in the disco shortly after 6 a.m. Not long after, eyewitnesses claim they saw Alistair again, this time alone, causing speculation that he drugged Amy to either sexually assault her or so she could be easily transported off the ship in a cargo container, going unnoticed by those around. Well, this is worst case scenario, perhaps. I mean, all of these scenarios suck, but her family does believe that she left the cabin to get coffee. Maybe that was why she left. To
take photos. Yeah. Something like that.
There was a woman in the disco that it's been hard to corroborate some of these because not all of the grand jury stuff is available for us to look at. Heather even called them today.
I called the clerk. They're going to send me, I think I'm going to get the archivist to send me the document. I mean, 2002 wasn't that long ago, but it was way before everything got scanned. So, and also grand jury proceedings are completely secret. So we're going to get the file and see, but it is hard to corroborate. But if there are people that are saying we saw this at 6 a.m.
One woman apparently had gotten sick before the cruise, and so she was on antibiotics and she couldn't really be in the sun, but she still wanted to go on the cruise. I don't know how you manage that, but so she was in the disco because it was dark and she could stay out of the sun before disembarking to go to Curacao. And so she said she saw Alistair and Amy walk in, that he turned the music up and then brought her a glass containing some kind of dark liquid. And then that the woman left the ship before she saw them leave because people were disembarking. A lot of people said it's noteworthy that there is a crew elevator in the disco.
That's something that I came across in reading all of the litigation and the statements from victims who have been assaulted on cruise ships, is the labyrinthine underneath part of the ship that is the crew is as one would be. Listen, all of us worked in service. Most of us have. I knew where the cameras were at Magic Time Machine. I knew where the cameras were at Sea Dog.
Sure.
And if you're trying to do something that you don't want anybody to see, for whatever it is, where you're texting and you're not supposed to be texting or whatever, making out or whatever, you know where the cameras are and you know how to hide from them. And in the repeated incidents of sexual assault that I read about on these cruise ships, they would whisk the victims to areas where they knew there were no cameras. And in one horrifying account that's on the International Cruise Victims Association website, a 16-year-old girl was given a drugged soda. And when she was at the teen hangout zone. There had been some, kind of like what Iva said, there were some like weird people on the ship that were kind of looking at her, and the mom thought that's kind of weird. But she was in the teen zone, which the mother was told they can't leave the teen zone without being signed out by an adult. So the mom's like, oh, okay, cool. I'll come and sign her back out in 2 hours. 2 hours later, comes back, gone. The employee's like, oh, well, she left with some friends. I don't know. They probably went to go get a coffee next door. And the mom's like, that's not the same as you. Only if, yes. She was like, I will. And again, it's like, you need to calm down. Please be quiet. No. You're making a fuss. The dad is alerted. The dad starts running around. They're like, we're looking for that weird group. It was other passengers, but she's like, there was like a weird group of early 20s teen guys.
Too old to be hanging out with a 16-year-old girl.
Yes. And the dad was happened to be walking down a stateroom and heard, we gave her too much. What do we do? What are we going to do? We gave her, she's not coming back. She's not waking up. So the dad goes and gets a steward and is like, you need to break into this room. The fucking employee goes, I really don't want to like disturb the guests or like bother them.
Bust down that fucking door.
The dad goes,
jail.
Okay.
I don't care.
He goes, all right, I will. Bop, 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 bop. And he said that an ashen-faced younger guy opened and was kind of like, yeah. And he's like, I know what you're doing in there. And they're like, no, we're not doing anything. Well, then I don't know if it was minutes or a couple hours later, a crew member says, oh, hey, we found her. She happened to be in this weird cubby hole downstairs. And the parents go down there and the girl's like, Mom. And they said she was super woozy out of it. They took her to the infirmary and the medical doctor on board said she has been dosed with a date rape drug. The mom said, oh, can we get a sample of her blood so they can test it? And he said, no. We're not going to give you that. And it's like, really? Because my kid, by your negligence, cruise line, you let her loose from this teen zone, which you said you wouldn't. She was then drugged. They did say there was no sign of sexual assault. But the scary thing is, it's like you have drugged this person.
Yeah.
This child, who, what if you drugged her just a little bit more and she died on the ship? Yeah. Would you say, okay, put her in the cargo hold and dump her out at the next port because we gave her too much and she ain't coming back?
Or they accidentally gave her too much and they weren't able to carry through with what their original plan was because they had a different situation on their hands. But if they had given her just a little less, then the chances that she had been sexually assaulted, I think, would have been pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they were concerned, like, oh, she may be dying. Yeah. She's losing consciousness. And she had said that. She's like, I passed out and I woke up and I was like in this stairwell. I don't even know where I'm at. God. So the idea that like, oh, well, it would be impossible. There would be cameras. Nowadays, perhaps, I think they've probably increased their cameras. Not in the rooms,
though. Maybe in the not hallways, inside the rooms. But not in the rooms.
Yeah, for sure in the hallways and stuff, but especially the underneath part of the ship, there are not only areas where there just aren't cameras, but there are areas where employees specifically, and some of them even told Vice, like, yeah, we fuck down there all the time. They have no idea because we know exactly where the stairwells are.
We or whatever. I mean, there's cargo holds, there's laundry chutes, there's all sorts of like stowaway type areas, little nooks and crannies, closets that nobody knows about.
And it's employed largely by folks from developing countries who are paid like $2 an hour. They're forced to work 18-hour days down there chopping, 10,000 onions for people or whatever on the ship. And so their heads are down. They're not going to go, I'd like to speak up and do the right thing because Royal Caribbean has fucking fired people for talking to the FBI. So this is the only money that you can send back to your family. You're not going to raise your hand because you see a couple of guys dragging an unconscious girl. It's fucking sad, but that is the exploitive nature of those under deck employees that I don't blame. They're not going to get involved.
No, I think it's like prison rules. Like I'm not saying anything, head down, mind your own business. Cause like you said, this might be the only money that they have to send back to their family somewhere. So if they blow it, then that's their whole livelihood. Yeah. And it sucks because it is at the expense of someone else's life, but it's inevitably the cruise line is at fault for allowing these things to happen on their watch and everyone kind of turning a blind eye like, well, that's just how things go on the cruise ship.
Yeah. And when you ask, like, oh, how is it possible that the cruise line could fire an employee? Isn't that retaliation? They're not subject to U.S. laws whatsoever, except with regards to like ship maintenance. But as far as employment laws, they fly flags of convenience. And so Carnival is Panama and Royal Caribbean is Liberia. And they choose countries that are purposefully lax with regard to labor regulations.
Fucking snakes, man.
It's fucked up. When you start digging into stuff, you're like, oh, goddamn, this is...
Yeah. And most people don't. So that's why you've got 2,000 people that are like, I'm just here to have a good time. I mean, which is what anybody that's going on a cruise is looking to do. Nobody's looking to have the worst fucking thing in the world happen to them. That's not what you anticipate. So, but they know that. They know that, like... we're all kind of sheeple, just getting herded on to this floating city for the next week.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie. I've been getting so many cruise ads because of the research for this. And I've watched like a couple of YouTube videos where it's like, hey guys, I'm on the Royal Caribbean. I'm going to give like the Rhapsody of the Seas. I watched, like I said, a tour of it. And I was like, damn, that looks fun though. Like,
yeah, they are fun. I've been on several. I mean, they can be fun, but
it's that, oh, damn.
Yeah. This knowing what I know now, I'm good. I think I can find those amenities on shore at a resort somewhere. And why a lot of people go is it is a convenient way to see a lot of places in 1 week that otherwise you'd have to fly and, get hotels at many different places. So it's nice in that regard. It's just not regulated to where it's safe.
No, not at this point. Sinisterhood will be right back. After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by the overpriced wireless providers, we have learned there's always a catch in all contracts. So when we heard that Mint Mobile wireless plans are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, I know we were thinking, what's the catch?
But after talking to them, it all made sense. There is no catch. Mint Mobile's secret is that they sell wireless services online. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you.
We signed up for a Mint Mobile phone because we needed a phone number for the show because we kept realizing things would ask for our phone numbers. We're like, we don't want to give them our phone number. We need a company number. So we got a company number. The thing is, recently, out of nowhere, on my personal line, which was not Mint Mobile, and that's my mistake, my service would just go out. It just would say SOS all the time. People would be like, I've called you. I've texted you. And if that had been our company number and we're missing work calls, we'd be like, well, the company's going down because you've been ignoring these phone calls. But with Mint Mobile, I have had zero service disruption. It's lightning fast. And the setup took 2 seconds. It was like the easiest thing. And all I needed was Paris to get the little boop boop to like beep the thing out of my phone and replace the SIM card. Well, all plans include unlimited talk and text, plus high-speed data on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone, like we did, and phone number, and bring over all your existing contacts.
To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/sinisterhood. That's mintmobile.com/sinisterhood.
Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/sinisterhood. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
If Amy did meet a sinister fate, the question still begs, what was the motive? A frontrunner for the reason is that Amy was abducted and became a victim of human trafficking. Eyewitness accounts and a photo from an escort site that was sent to the Bradleys seemingly corroborate this theory. However, due to the sightings not being reported at the time they occurred, none of the eyewitness accounts have led anywhere. Additionally, experts have noted that Amy is not the typical target for trafficking. She was on this cruise with her family, and it would be quickly noticed and reported that she was missing.
That's the one thing that all cruise employees or, whoever you think might have done this is the one thing they all know is that if a crime happens against an American, worst case scenario, the FBI is going to board this ship. Best case scenario, nobody notices and maybe I'll get away with it, which does happen. Or even if I do get caught, maybe they won't call the FBI. They'll just forget about it. But that does make trafficking less likely just given that she was not alone and was American, therefore that kind of is subject to a more rigorous investigation.
Not alone, not just not alone, but with a family that was very tight knit. So, within 30 minutes of not knowing where she was, the dad's up and looking for her, like that kind of relationship. It was so uncommon for her. So, typically victims of targeting are marginalized, vulnerable children or women that are in some kind of distress already, that, the perpetrator is looking to help them, groom them, kind of lure them in. I think it would be difficult for someone like Amy to be trafficked in that area just because she is American. She looks so much different than everyone on the island and would stand out. And it was such a high profile case.
No, it's true. I mean, it's not to say it does not happen. There was a famous case a couple years ago that a woman was out for a walk in Venezuela and just snatched off the street. And she's like, I woke up in a private plane. I ended up in the Bahamas in a nice condo on Bimini Island behind the Hilton that she said she said she remembered. It said like Villa 662. And she's like, I told myself, don't forget that number. And they took her in and she said from the window outside, it looked like a nice Airbnb, like super well decorated. But she goes around the corner, down the hallway, there were women in every room. And it was a trafficking operation. And basically she was thrown in a room, forced to be with men all day long, taped up her mouth sometimes. But when they figured out like she was, kind of not giving up, but like was more compliant, they took the tape off, took the things off her hands. And just so happened I think she was coming to the bathroom and one of the other victims was leaving the bathroom. She stopped the other victim and said like, where are we? And the other victim said, I shouldn't tell you this, but we're in the Bahamas. We're on Bimini Island. We're behind the Hilton. And the other victim said, here's my cell phone. I don't know what to do with it. They're going to catch me. I don't know what to do with it. So the woman took the cell phone and got on Twitter and she started tweeting to her family and said, I am in the Bahamas. Somebody help me. I'm in Villa 662 on Bimini Island behind the Hilton. And she goes live on Vine later on when she got in the bathroom. And the video is harrowing. Of course, it's all in Spanish, but she's just saying like, somebody help me, please. It's Villa 662 behind the Hilton. I was taken from the street. Please come and get me. And eventually somebody called in a couple hours later, the authorities in the Bahamas came in and got her and everybody else out. But that idea that you're just, walking down the street one day and then, next day, you're in a good, nice looking condo behind a Hilton. It's also eerie to think, I'm going to go for a walk around my hotel. Well, these condos look nice. Yeah. You do not know what's, going on behind those doors.
No. And I think probably a lot of the customers are coming from those Hiltons.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's just unless you have a robustly regulated sex work industry, it is exploitive, painful, dangerous. And that's why you need the female autonomy in that. We're like, I want to be doing this. And I am, like I said, there's somebody looking out for me, somebody I can call if this goes wrong.
I make my own rules and, I get to say like what goes. And if I'm uncomfortable, I can say no to that.
Truly. All that to say, that is a very rare instance. I think it was the 2022 Advanced Criminal Law, CLE thing I sat through. There was a human trafficking section on it, and it is primarily, I think the age is like 12 to 14, the average age.
Unfortunately, I read that the average age for trafficking victims when they first get involved is 12, which is
it's
nauseating.
No, it's horrifying. And it is oftentimes that kids, teens who are, they're in marginalized communities. They're in a situation where one or both parents isn't around. And so they're susceptible to go and like live with this. But with regards to the website, very frequently utilizing, Backpage, Craigslist, the internet to perpetuate these kind of things. And in that instance, God bless the law enforcement who go in and help trafficking victims, because that was the woman that gave the CLE gave a very specific case. Of course, she omitted the young girl's name, but spoke about this case, and it is heavily entrenched and extremely difficult to even extricate him out of that, because oftentimes the girl said she was 15. She's like, "Oh, he loves me."
Yeah,
like
no, my mom's
my mom's pimp did that. Yes, that she said. Well, my mom had a guy who loved her, and it was like that was her, guy that was running the show, and she said he loves me too. And it's like, no, girl, he does not. It's just hard to get him out of it.
Well, and so often too, they get them hooked on drugs. And so then they're dependent on that. And so they stay with them because, they're kind of forced to at that point.
Yeah. And it was a family friend, that's what the presenter said it oftentimes is. It's someone that kind of tangentially knows or is in the community, in the sphere of the kid already. So the snatched off a cruise ship, snatched off the street, harrowing and horrifying, not truly the norm. Oftentimes it is more like a young person or a person who is has some substance use issue that can just be manipulated and kept in that horrible situation.
Another heartbreaking theory is that Amy disembarked the ship, either of her own free will or by force, only to meet her end on the island of Curacao. And if not murdered on the island, there has also been speculation that she may have been killed on board the cruise ship, her body hidden away during the search and discarded of at a later time, perhaps once the ship reached open water again. Those who subscribe to these theories believe Alistair Douglas and possibly other crew members were responsible for her murder and cover-up.
And he maintains his innocence. He's never
found
charged.
God now. He's like a preacher, and he's gone, like overboard with the religion.
Yeah, and the FBI could have charged him or further investigated and did not. So there's that. But I think the number one piece of evidence that gets people pointing back at this is the eyewitnesses who said, "Oh, we saw her at 5:45 with the bass player." Like very specifically, that girl in the picture, I saw her 30 minutes ago. It's not like, well, it's an eyewitness from 2 years ago and maybe it was in passing. It's like this person was on the ship in an area where Amy was known to have been with a person that would have been fairly recognizable, and if that's what they say they saw, that's what points most people to that theory.
Yeah. And she had a very short haircut. I mean, she would have stood out, I think, as, not looking like all the other passengers. Somebody memorable. If you saw her, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's because, I mean, her hair and just her joyful nature and her age and everything kind of made her stand out.
Well, and her green eyes, too, is what the taxi driver remembered. And in the pictures, her parents are right. There's like a podcaster that Paris watches his things on YouTube. And I'm always like, God, his eyes are so blue. And I know, it's one of those where I'm like, I know it's Colin Coward for those of you who are wondering. But I was like, it's one of those, I know if I saw him in person, I'd be like, God damn, your eyes are blue. And it's kind of like that.
What's his name from Great British Baking Show? Paul. I can't think of his last name. Oh, what is this? It's something like
Hollywood?
Paul Hollywood. That's it. I was like, it's something ridiculous. Like
I only know that because I bought you a Great British Bake Off sticker for your birthday once, and I knew nothing about the show, so I had to search stuff about it to make sure that it was a good sticker to get.
Yeah, no, it was. But yeah, his eyes are like piercing blue. So things like that do stand out to people, and they remember that for sure. Nearly 26 years have passed since Amy went missing in the early morning hours aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. Countless tips, many credible, have come in since that time, yet the Bradleys and the FBI are no closer to finding Amy now than they were then. Still, Amy's family refuses to give up hope that they may one day see their beloved daughter and sister again. Her brother Brad shared with Disappeared the emotional toll losing his sister has had on him.
This is torturous to think about a million things and just not know. But as time has gone on, I've learned that not knowing is the only thing that allows us any hope. I was blessed to have Amy for as long as I did.
When Iva spoke with interviewers during the 2018 episode of Disappeared featuring Amy's case, she tearfully told them how their dedication to finding Amy has not wavered.
Even though it's been this many years, and it's hard for me to say that we're coming up on 20 years, we believe Amy's out there. We followed some crazy stuff, but if you don't, it might be that one time, that it could be her.
That really stuck with me because she's right. I mean, if I was in her shoes, I would also pay whoever that I thought could help me and go wherever. And sometimes I might get scammed, but like she said, it's that one time that I couldn't live with myself if there was a lead I didn't follow up, and that ended up being the one time that it led to her.
Right. And I think you probably spiritually kind of think, I'm never going to give up hope because I want her to believe and stay alive and not just, give up and go, God, I've been in this horrible trafficking ring for 20 years and I'm miserable and whatever. I'll just jump off of something, to think my family would never give up. They're still looking for me. And to see in the news, the Amy Bradley's family is still looking for her. She happens to see that. It might be the only thing keeping her going. Yeah. So you can't ever blame a family for how they deal with their grief. And I think they've shown extreme dedication. But like Brad said, it's like that hope and that keeping trying. The unknowing is what keeps the hope going.
And that's really interesting because usually you see the opposite, that the family is in missing cases like, well, at least we know now and it gives us some closure. But I kind of, and I hope I never find myself in this situation, but I feel like I would kind of side with Brad where if they find a body, then that's it. You do have closure and maybe there's, that can help in some ways. But if you never find her, there still is that hope that you could. And I think that is what would keep me going.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're just as motivated. I mean, Cruise Ship Killers came out just a couple years ago, and they do interviews on that. And so the family is still actively participating in these interviews. The Beth Holloway one was a few years back, but they're still out there. The FBI is still looking for tips, too.
Yeah. The disappearance of Amy Bradley is still an open and ongoing case. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $25,000 for any information that could potentially lead to the recovery of Amy Lynn Bradley. The Bradley family is offering a $250,000 reward for information leading to Amy's safe return and a $50,000 reward for information leading to her current location. If you have any information that would be helpful to the case, please contact the FBI at 202-278-2000. You can also contact your local FBI field office or American Embassy or consulate. Links with contact information are available in the episode description and show notes. So what do we think?
It's, all the scenarios, everybody always immediately goes, she fell out, that's most likely. And the horrifying thing is that it would have been extremely easy for her to have fallen off in 1998 and no one have noticed. And what we kind of tell ourselves is like, oh, but in 2010 Congress passed this law, so we'll be okay. But like we said earlier, really all they have is kind of thermal cameras or CCTV footage that's not even monitored 24/7. And falling overboard incidents, while they're rare, they are the number one way to die on the leading cause of death for cruise ship passengers. So, I mean, like you said, it is just Occam's razor. It's like 23% of deaths are falling overboard. That also to say murder, suicide, and terror attack are 19% of, but I don't know that murder, suicide, and terror attack, I would not have grouped those together as a researcher because I think those are kind of three different things. But
I agree.
Falling overboard being the leading cause of death, that is what I think a lot of people point to. However, 1998, at the time of this incident, the New York Times reported that FBI agents in Miami, which is the busiest cruise port and where these calls go to in the Caribbean when there's, incidents on ships, they said they were called out to investigate shipboard sexual assaults every other week. That's how frequent this was happening. And it was, the large majority was crew on passenger crime because of the things we talked about in the last episode of not, there was much, much lower standards. There were these quotas to meet from these staffing agencies. So you get people on board. The cruise ships after the fact were whisking people away. And especially that same year in 1998, at that time, Royal Caribbean had a pattern, or at least an incident of lying to, telling its employee, you got to lie to this grand jury. Of course, it was about an environmental thing, but to me, it's like, that's reflective, at least at the time, of what the company was doing. The 2010 law that was passed, they didn't have peepholes on doors back then. And that's how several people were sexually assaulted and raped on cruise ships, is because they had no peepholes. So the door, you think it's your friend, and then you crack the door and it is a whether it was a janitor who was kind of sort of pretending to be a security guard or just straight up a waiter from earlier or whatever, force their way in and attack you, you wouldn't have known that. So they do have peepholes now. They didn't provide rape kits for a while. They would tell the passengers, you've got to pay for that. We need you to fund your own rape kit. Or say, would you just gather the stuff, the evidence, or would come in and sit on the beds and mess it up. So in the late 90s, the cruise ships had a big problem. Late 90s up until 2010 when this law was passed. And it was only by really loud victims advocates, by survivors, surviving family members, and those experts. There was like Ross Klein as a professor, I think at the University of Newfoundland, that he's like a sociology professor, but he's like an expert in crime on cruise ships. And it's only with these like really loud cohorts of people going, you got to do something. And just because this law got passed, it hasn't even been implemented. There's a Business Insider article like 3 months ago that was like, cruise ships are supposed to implement this technology. And it was so vaguely worded that the Coast Guard was supposed to undertake rulemaking procedures, and then it didn't. And so now it's just kind of sitting out there. So then the cruise ship companies get asked, and they're like, the Coast Guard said we didn't have to. And the Coast Guard gets asked, and they're like, well, we haven't really gotten around to making the rule. It's like, it's been like 15 years. What do you mean you haven't made the rule yet? Yeah. And so I think we need to see where the cruise ships are actually following this now 14-year-old law, and not accepting, but it would be really expensive for us to implement that as an excuse. Because I feel like that's kind of the argument. They're like, well, it's these measures are really expensive, man overboard. So even if she did fall overboard, man overboard technology, it's so expensive. But Ross Klein was like, they can literally give away a cabin for free and still make a profit because onboard purchases, drinks, casino gambling, spa treatments, all that stuff. He's like, they don't really need to charge you for the room. So because they have such a high profit margin, and that's also seen in the way that they have fairly exploited labor from developing countries and places where they, only pay people $1 a day or whatever. I think the whine of like, it would be really expensive to implement that. And really, not that many people a year fall overboard. Fuck you. If it's your family member, I don't care if it's one person, when it is, to go like, well, really only like 20 people fell overboard. Is that really worth it to like spend all this money on that? I would argue, yeah. I
would
think
argue
it is.
that if any industry where there's a high risk of something happening, even if it's not necessarily a high probability it's going to happen, but worst case scenario, this could happen. And it has happened. You have to take measures to at least try and prevent it from happening, not just accepting it as kind of like, well, this is part of what you're signing up for if you come on board one of these things. And
you have to know if you are, because I've seen, like I said, in the cruise forums and stuff, that people are like so into it and love it. Like, I've done 194 cruises. I love it. That's fine. You just need to know they don't give a fuck about you. They'll tell you that they do. They'll sell you that they do. When the rubber meets the road, they do the bare minimum required. They're because of the flags of convenience in Panama and Liberia, they pay like a 0.8% tax rate. They pay like no taxes. Like I said, they pay dock fees and stuff, but specifically being in those countries. So when someone falls overboard or when someone's attacked on board, we pay for it. Like the American people pay for it. Like my tax dollars that I get irritated every time I have to write them a check, but we pay for it. The U.S. Coast Guard conducts the search for man overboard people. The FBI is doing the investigation for crime. So one of the attorneys talked to Insider and was like, there's no financial consequence for them when somebody goes overboard. So they really have no incentive to install these systems unless we tell our lawmakers, like, somebody's got to do something. Like the doors are flying off the airplanes. People are loose from the cruise ships. So I know I probably sound like a crazy, like, she thinks everything needs to be regulated. Yeah, I do, actually, because I don't want anyone to get injured. And because I know firsthand, having worked in the securities industry, publicly traded companies are under a duty to do the absolute maximum they can for profit. And that does not mean the maximum they can for safety if it cuts into profit. The only time that they will do that is if you cut into their profit. And why this thing got passed in 2010 is because Kendall Carver, who has now passed away, but he had lost his daughter on an Alaska cruise. She was gone. She fell overboard. For 5 days, they didn't notice. Nobody said anything. Her stateroom was empty. They donated
family didn't notice?
She was on the cruise by herself.
Oh, that's right. She was by herself.
She was on it by herself. The cruise, one of the cruise guys goes, that's kind of weird. That lady hadn't been back to her room. They go, just don't worry about it. And when the cruise docked, they took all of her shit, put some of it in storage, donated some of it. And he got together with these other people and made a lot of noise. And a woman that was raped, who was basically told, it's kind of a he said, she said, we're really not taking any responsibility because the room got Lysoled after she was raped. The thing that happened to the young girl. It was not until victims came together and said, we're fucking done with this. Like, this is enough. Somebody do something. And having lawmakers go, and they love, the senators were up there. To be fair, it's also like there's self-interest. They probably have a little bit of belief in what's right, but they'll be like, my constituent was this and this happened to them. So until I think we see the implementation and the enforcement of the law that was already passed 14 years ago, that it is like reported on in the media that the cruise ships have been like, nobody said we had to do anything, so we don't have that technology. We just have cameras that no one's watching, until we go like, hey, I think we'd like a little bit more regulation there. They're not going to do anything. And so
what do you think? Are you saying then you think she fell overboard?
It could be because it was so unregulated. It could either be that she fell overboard. I am very persuaded, though, by those young women that stopped them at that initial search and said, hey, we just saw her in that window of time that Ron was asleep. We just saw her with the bass player walking into this club, walking into the disco, in which case, did she drink something? She got sick. She was hidden away. Was she drugged for a nefarious purpose? It killed her. And then you kind of go, we got to get rid of this body. And then she fell overboard in a different way. I don't know. Didn't fall overboard, was thrown overboard.
So what is your theory then of what happened?
I don't think I think she left the cabin. I think she left the cabin and something bad happened to her in between. I doubt that she was trafficked. I don't know that the people on land were as credible to me. Well, I just mean like as like credible, being like, I really remember her. The taxi driver, Royal Caribbean seemed to think the taxi driver was credible, but that was also benefited them in their lawsuit. But Judy Maurer, she saw what she saw. The picture of Jazz is very convincing, and it's kind of like what they said, what the family said. Even if it's the craziest, least likely scenario, it doesn't mean it. It's like saying if you fall off a cruise ship, you will die immediately. That's not true. Some people fall off and they live. So there are black swan events like that. So there could be an event here where she got drugged and she was whisked off. And I would say, though, the life expectancy of a person who is subjected to repeated sexual abuse, probably substances, things like that, I would say would probably not be 20 years.
Yeah. I do think that there is a chance she fell overboard. And I know it's not the popular online theory, but I think a lot of these cases, people don't like the Occam's razor answer because it's not the interesting one.
Yeah.
I also think it's possible that she was drugged and assaulted on the ship and killed on the ship and later disposed of. I personally don't think that she was trafficked. I think the eyewitness accounts seem just not very credible. I think it's easy for people months or years later to be like, oh, well, yeah, I kind of remember that, but it's just memories are so fuzzy and it's hard to put a lot of stock in that. I know you want to because you want to believe she's alive, but I think the more realistic explanation would be that she either fell overboard or met her fate on the ship and then was either taken off the ship in a cargo container or something and disposed of, or later dumped overboard once they reached the open ocean. I think that Alistair guy is shady. I think that it's the eyewitness accounts of seeing him, especially give her a drink and stuff, and knowing that he had been kind of interested, dancing close to her and stuff like that. I think that's a possibility, but I also, I think there's a lot of reasons that point to why she could have also fallen overboard. One of the main sticking points for me is that her sandals and all of her shoes were still in the cabin. And it seems like if you were going to leave the cabin and you're going somewhere, you'd put on a pair of shoes. If you maybe walked back in the room from the balcony to grab your cigarettes and change into your night clothes, because they said that, her clothes had been changed, and walk back out there. For the reason of how she fell overboard, I certainly don't think it was intentional. Mm-hmm. Either drunk and tired and, just it's not a common occurrence, but it's definitely one that can happen. And I think it definitely could have. My other theory would be that she was killed on the ship.
Yeah, I mean, if you lean over to take a picture, even if you go, well, she's afraid of it, but go, man, it's sunrise. Maybe I can just lean over and just get a picture, and you hit a wave, and it just so happens.
Sick. Or you're throwing up over the side or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of people say like, well, if you sit on those railings, I don't know who's sitting on the railings. I would have never dared sit on a railing on a cruise ship on a balcony or up top, but I think it's possible. I agree that in the unlikely event that she was trafficked, I don't think she would still be alive.
No, and that's the hard thing.
The thing too with the eyewitness accounts on like Mondo Beach and people saying, well, I saw her by herself. I just can't imagine you would have seen her by herself. If she was able to be by herself, I think she would have done
Called
whatever she could to get out of there. Yes, escaped somehow, So that doesn't really sit right with me. And I don't know. In these situations, I tend to think the most likely explanation is probably what happened. Whatever happened, it's tragic, it's awful. And I hope that the laws that you were just talking about do get passed and implemented to where if people do fall overboard, there's something that maybe can be done quicker. And also the accountability and vetting of the employees on that ship and taking more seriously when things like sexual assault and rape and everything happen, that it's not just brushed under the rug because these cruise ships have so much money that, people are people. They're not just a cabin or dollars on your ship. That your rights and your protection and safety don't end as soon as you board that ship.
No, that's true. And while like the vast majority of people that go on cruises are not victims of crime or anything like that, when you are, there absolutely should be repercussions, things that the cruise lines do. And in congressional testimony, the Cruise Line Association said, we don't have any responsibility to investigate anything back then, at least. And I don't know that they've really like gotten gung ho on it because they say, oh, it's so expensive, our shareholders. So you're right. I think the two most likely scenarios are falling overboard. And then given the time period this was in 1998, it was rampant. A sexual assault on the cruise ships was. I mean, like I said, it was higher than the state of New Jersey, higher than the state of California, the per capita amount of sexual assaults on board. So either of those. But like you said, sadly for her family, I'm glad that they still have the unknown and that hope that they can hang on to. But it is more likely that she was killed while still, in those early days, whether it was from falling overboard or from, being drugged or crying out and didn't want to get caught and all that kind of stuff. So it's, to be clear, again, the bass player, nobody from Royal Caribbean or anything was charged with the crime. But
I did read he was fired shortly after for fraternizing with a passenger. Which may have been their way of being like, we need you off the ship because you're too much of a liability because you're tied to this case.
And the plaintiff's attorneys who represented several victims of cruise ships, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, said it was the absolute policy of Royal Caribbean to either fire or put the perpetrators on medical leave and ship them back to their home countries far away from FBI jurisdiction. And to me, the number one thing that kind of speaks against the falling overboard theory is like the FBI and the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice only pursues like 10% of cases of the cruise ship crimes that have been reported. So the FBI has also told so many victims, there's really not enough evidence for us to go on. Sorry. So the fact that there were still FBI agents in 2018 doing interviews, they still have an active website, they're still putting out sketches. The FBI, everybody on the internet's like, she obviously fell overboard, you idiots. And it's like, I'm glad you're smarter than an FBI agent. It's like, you can say it is a likely scenario, but if it absolutely definitively is that, then why would the very limited resources of the federal government still, I would say, waste their time, but still spend their time on something if it is such an easy open and shut case? And just the Wild West.
Most of what I've seen online, there are a lot of people saying she fell overboard, but there's an equal amount of saying she was trafficked.
Yeah.
But to those comments, people respond with, people love to say, throw that word around. Like,
trafficking.
Yeah.
And a person approached me in the Target parking lot. I was being trafficked. It's like, they're probably going to steal your bag.
When you really look into the victims that are normally targeted, where, how, for what reasons, Amy doesn't really fall into that category. I also read that there were theories that she had been abducted and then used as a breeder, which would just be someone to have children, and then those children are sold. Yeah.
I did not know that
themselves.
Was a thing in the fathoms, the depths of darkness to which humans will treat one another.
Yes.
It unfortunately still shocks me, I guess fortunately. But you're right. I think an educated American who is capable, like resourceful can, versus a vulnerable teen or kid, she is not the most likely candidate for trafficking. And especially, like you said, being out on beaches by herself, the victims of trafficking that I have, read their stories and testimonies and, heard that CLE is like, they are kept in a room, they're kept somewhere where they can't get away. They can't scream or say like, hey, help me, whatever, none of that. So like
I
you
also
said,
don't think she would have been kept on Curacao because that seems, it's such a small island and obviously her family's going to come back. And I think it would have been too risky, especially with her being a white woman with green eyes and short hair. I just think it would have been
really
hard.
Specific.
Yeah, it's hard to move her around, I mean, is it possible? Sure, anything is possible, but personally, I don't think it's the most likely scenario. And honestly, for her sake, I hope it wasn't, because of all the fates she could have met. To me, that is the most heinous, to be kept alive, but repeatedly abused and drugged and traumatized. That's no life. So whatever happened, I hope it was swift and painless, and that she is at peace wherever she is. And I hope that her family is able to find, I'm sure they have over 26 years, find a new way of dealing and going on and having peace within themselves. But it's never something that
can't get over.
No, I mean, watching Iva in those interviews just from 2018, I mean, the grief is as if it had just happened, in the way she talks about when she found things up, she's like, I remember hearing and immediately throwing up. And I'm like, that's real. That's like what really happens when these waves of grief that you don't expect, come up on you. And their vulnerability and their emotion and grief is so real and raw. And my heart just breaks for this family, that something that was supposed to be this once in a lifetime, as Iva called it, opportunity for all of them to go out on this, it was paid for by Ron's work and stuff. And for it to end so tragically it's unfathomable. And I hope that their dedication to continuing to keep Amy's name out there in the news and her story if it doesn't bring her back home, at least it changes how things are currently done, laws and bills, to where things are safer and there's more accountability for people in these situations.
And like you said, and we don't say, oh, well, it's just a cabin, it's just a dollar sign on the person's head, and saying your tasks, Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Norwegian, Disney, whatever, you are tasked with souls. Like like in maritime language when they're like, we have X souls aboard. That is souls. That is human people. And so to say like, it's kind of expensive to put that stuff on the ship. I don't know. We'll figure it out when they fall out.
You know what's also expensive? A fucking 4-story slide and a zip line and 18 hot tubs and a million restaurants.
Yeah.
The shit they have, the whole thing is expensive. They're wild, these cruise ships. So it's not going to break your bank to put in the extra money for that. And I honestly think it's a cop out. I don't think it's the money. I think they just don't want the to have to be responsible for that. The more the more things you do, the more responsible you become of like, and then you open yourself up to more lawsuits because like, oh, well, so I think that they are using that as an excuse to just kind of keep their hands clean.
Well, and it's much like delete her from the footage. It's like, we don't want to talk about the crimes on a cruise ship. And all that to say, if you like to cruise, go cruise. Do it with your eyes wide open. You have to be just as aware as you are on land. And knowing that from 2010 to 2013, like the first few years that this was implemented, the congressional staffers got information from the FBI, and the cruise lines were required to report crimes. When they compared what the cruise ships reported with what victims reported, there was a 30 times higher rate of actual crime than what was reported, what they said by statute they were required to. So finding these incidents where the cruise ships don't want to talk about it, they don't want to report it, the Department of Transportation website where this information should be public for you to go view has not been updated since 2022. And when asked for comment, they kind of went, we don't really know what's going on. The Department of Transportation's like, not sure. And so just understand, go to it with your eyes wide open. And if you are a super fan of cruises, then you should be concerned, or at least you should say, hey, why don't you guys comply with a law that you're already supposed to? And, reach out to your senator, congressman, whatever, because they're running the Wild West of the seas.
It is, yeah.
Floating cities, for real.
Well, if anyone has any information that they think is helpful, go to our episode description and show notes. Again, the FBI's phone number is 202-278-2000. And you can also contact your local FBI field office or the American Embassy or Consulate with any information. They're still taking tips. They're still very active. So
if you were on that cruise, go through your old pictures. Maybe if you had your video camera or something, you never know.
Yeah. This episode of Sinisterhood is made possible with the help of our amazing patrons.
If you're interested in supporting the show, consider joining our Patreon. You'll get access to ad-free regular episodes, weekly bonus content, you're able to vote on episode topics, join our monthly live streams, and more.
Keep it creepy.
Mwahaha.